color grading in Photoshop, something I love very much. And so here we are with one of my photo montages, my digital art. And over here on the right, you can see the layers panel. So I just simply start off by doing a Command Option J to create a new layer. And by doing the Option or Alt on a PC, it gives me the new layer dialog where I can then type in the name of it. So I'm just going to call it color grading. And I'm going to do a variation on this. So I'm going to do a Command Option J on that layer, which brings up the same kind of panel or dialog. I'm just going to say black and white to color. So I have those two layers. I'm going to start with the first one, color grading. So while you're in Photoshop, it's as simple as just going up to the filter menu and choosing Camera Raw filter. So then it opens up its own panel, as you can see here. Zoom out, Command minus on a Mac, Control minus on a PC. And because I was in this panel recently, it defaulted to opening up in the color grading panel, but it might look more like this when you open up Camera Raw. So you have basic, curve, detail, color mixer, then color grading. So if you were to go to basic, just to let you know, you would be able to do tweaking of the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, etc. But we are going to do a special kind of stylization called color grading. And so when I click on the little downward triangle, it jumps to this view. So in this view, it's showing you that you can focus on your midtones, your shadows, or your highlights. You also notice that there's these icons up here at the top by the name color grading. And if you clicked on the first one, you go to shadows, midtones, or highlights. And then if you go to the one on the right, it says global. So I like working in this view. It's very focused. And so if you're making changes under the global view, it means that it would just apply a specific color to the image that you're working on. So if I click here, it's adding green, blue, a darker blue, purple, magenta, orange, as it follows the color wheel, color spectrum. And the way that this works is, say I wanted to add blue. Obviously that's a bit strong, but what you can do is you can click on the circle that you've created, and as you pull it in towards the middle, you're decreasing the saturation. So if I zoom in, you can see that when I go here, the saturation slider moves to the right to saturate more, and as I go towards the middle, it desaturates. So if I go here, I'm back to 0. Zoom back out. So in this case, I do want to bring it, say, midway. So in this case, it's about 54. So that's the global color grading. Now, if I didn't want to do that and I wanted to add maybe a variation of different colors to it, I can click back to the center point. I can go to my shadows, and then same idea. I just decide what I want to be in the shadows, so maybe like a bluish purple. So to do that, that is the bluish purple in the darker areas of the image, the shadow areas. And once again, if I click on that circle and pull, I'm decreasing the saturation. And of course, you could also go directly to the saturation slider and decrease it that way. So either way, you can choose the way to do that. So then with shadows done, I can go to my midtones and then decide maybe I'll add a little green to the midtone areas. It's a little strong, so I bring it back in, down towards the middle, which decreases saturation. And then if I click on highlights, maybe I'll add red just for effect, and then bring that back so the highlighted areas have a tinge of red to them. So I've added like a purple to the darks, green to the midtones, and a bit of red to the highlights. And then when I hit OK, it brings me back to my image. So here's before, here's after. Now, one thing I can do is if I wanted to be able to change my mind, I could make it a smart object. So on this layer, in this version, before I go into the camera raw filter, I right click in the layers panel and I say convert to smart object. Then you'll notice that it has a bit of a smart object icon at the bottom right, just to tell you that it is now a smart object. And then when I go to filter, camera raw filter down here, I jump back in, Command minus to zoom out a little bit. And then in this case, as I name the layer black and white to color grading, I go to the top of this panel on the right, and you can see it says black and white. So if I click on that, it converts this layer, this image, to black and white. And then you'll notice what used to say color mixer is now black and white mixer, even though this preview, when you hold it up, says color mixer. It's really black and white mixer now. It's still reading color, so that's why you see the different colors listed. So you see red, oranges, yellow, green, aqua, blue, etc. So it's still reading that color in your image. So if you remember where that particular color is in your image, you can tweak it. So if I go like this for my blues to the right, it becomes lighter. If I pull it to the left, it becomes darker. And yet, obviously, you're not going to be able to remember all the different colors that built up that image. So therefore, they have this wonderful tool called the Target Adjustment Tool. So when I click on that, I can go over to a specific area of the image. I click, and as I pull to the right, it sees that it's greens in that area, and it makes it lighter. And if I pull to the left, it can make it darker. If I go more to like a mid-tone range, it sees that it's blue. So if I go to the right, it lightens that area. And if I pull to the left while holding the cursor down, it makes it darker in that specific area. So I'm just trying to create some good contrast for the image. So it seems like a good range. So start off with black and white. And then as you can see in the panel, there is the color grading area. So once again, even though it starts off with black and white, I can click on global, and then I can add a specific color to it all. So now it's kind of like a monotone blue. And I can always bring that back in to make it less intense. Or I bring it back to the middle, to 0, and decide that I can make it 2 or 3 colors. So I click on the shadows, and then I'm going to choose a dark blue. And I'm just going to bring it in just a little bit, about 77 saturation. Click on highlights, and maybe I want kind of like a yellowish orange, or maybe more yellowish maybe for this effect. And as I pull it in, that decreases saturation down to about 53, maybe too low, so maybe more like a 65, yep. And then just to add to the image, I'll click on the midtones and maybe choose green at first. And as I pull it in, decrease the saturation down to about 30. There's kind of like a blue to green to yellow kind of feel now of the image. And then the beauty of this is, even though it started at black and white, you added that color grading. I now can hit OK. Brings me back into Photoshop. And then as you can see here on the right, the layer now has a smart filter connected to it. So I can turn it on, turn it off for preview. Turn off the eye icon. That's after the color grading. That's before. And then if I were to double click on this where it says camera raw filter, I would go back into that camera raw filter again, and I could tweak or change those specific colors. So zoom back in. So I turn this off. You can see it before, after the 2 different layers. And then you see that there's this white area. So this white area where it says smart filter is a built-in layer mask. So if I select that and you see the little frame around it, I zoom back out, then with that frame around it, and I have black as my foreground color, I can choose my brush. I have a large brush right now. I hit the left bracket to make it a little smaller. I always go up to my options bar. I'll show up here, up to my options bar. And as I hover the cursor over the word opacity, I can bring it down to more like a 35 area. And that's like the strength of the brush. And then with black as my foreground color, when I paint while I'm in that layer mask, I can decrease the effect in certain areas. So wherever I paint, it's letting the layer underneath come through. So say I wanted some of that blue that was in the original, I can do the blue, bring that back, and kind of blend a little bit of the two. Turn it on, turn it off to see. Maybe I want a little bit more of some of the original purple. So I'm still in that layer mask. I just remember where that purple was, so I paint back in those specific areas on the left and right side to kind of balance the image a little bit more. A little burst of blue down there. It's creating kind of a surreal montage, playing with the color grading. But as you can see, started off like this. Then I did color grading where it added a little bit more color, like a reddish to the midtones or highlights in a different kind of blue. And then I also created another layer that I converted to black and white in Camera Raw filter, and then also did the color grading for this effect. So I hope that helps. That's a kind of fun tool, color grading through the Camera Raw filter. Thank you very much. And